We are going to bring in our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, from what we do know, India has reacted on the situation in West Asia as well. New Delhi says it is seriously concerned regarding the escalation of hostilities between Israel and Iran, which threatens peace and security in the region. India has called for immediate de-escalation, exercise of restraint, stepping back from violence and returning to a path of diplomacy. What can you tell us, Siddhant?
Well, quite a balanced statement by New Delhi. India has good relationship with both Iran and Israel, and of course, India has had quite a significant engagement with both the countries. Now, essentially, India's statement calling for de-escalation is India's long-standing policy on emphasis on de-escalation and diplomacy as well. It has been mentioned that the focus should be on diplomacy as well. Roughly around 10,000 Indians are there in Iran and approximately 18,000 in Israel. In fact, a batch of Indians, just construction worker, left for Israel just recently. So essentially, for India, stakes are high in the wider region as well because there could be a major spillover. We know that the airspace in West Asian region is effectively now closed from Israel to almost Iran, and there are no flights, so that also increases the flight costs and time for flights coming from Europe to India and from India to Europe. So several stakes for India. It is India's extended neighborhood, and India has been emphasizing on that. So essentially a delicate situation for India, even as India will be hoping that the situation de-escalates soon.
Right. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, coming back to you, thank you so much for being so patient and staying on with us. I want to begin by asking you, what is your assessment of how things have transpired? These attacks, something that Israel was warned to brace itself for. More than that, how do you assess the statements that are coming out of Iran? It appears that it's trying its best to justify its actions, absolve itself of any consequences of its retaliatory strikes on Israel. What's your assessment?
Well, look, I think we really need to keep front and center that the only reason that this has happened, your correspondent mentioned there a minute ago, this is the first time in history that Iran has directly attacked Israel from its territory. And we have to ask why. It's not hard to figure out. It's very clear. It's because Israel chose to break all diplomatic norms and destroy an embassy building in Syria. To assassinate one of the leaders of the IRGC. So they had done that 17 times before since October 7th. So it was nothing unusual as far as that goes, but that they chose the most almost sacred position that any country has, and that is their embassy. It was certain that Iran was going to have to retaliate in some way. That's literally an act of war to attack the embassy of another country. So no one should be surprised by that, but we should also be encouraged by the fact that Iran is still trying to de-escalate this. They don't want it to go to war. They don't want to have a war with the U.S. or with Israel, and they're trying to say, all right, as far as we're concerned, we're even now. We'll be stopped here. But they'll come back much harder if Netanyahu escalates and goes into Iran.
All right, you're absolutely right, sir. They did say that this should be deemed concluded. That being said, it appears that you agree with this as well, that the ball really is in Israel's court now. What sort of a response or a reaction can we expect from Israel, and how is that likely to impact the war between Israel and Hamas, and how things pan out in the region going forward?
Well, look, past his prologue, I mean, Netanyahu has almost never done anything tepid or small in his life, especially since October 7th. And he has been very forceful in nearly all of his engagements, both with the United States and how he's conducted this war in Gaza. And I expect his bold proclamations that he's going to respond firmly and decisively. I take him at his word. I think he's going to. And I think he's probably going to hit harder than any of us would like to. It remains to be seen if U.S. or other agencies, maybe even India, are going to be able to diplomatically rein Netanyahu back to de-escalate this stage. Because if Netanyahu goes in and maybe hits some symbolic sites but doesn't have any big casualties, maybe then Iran would also be able to say, all right, we'll call this even and we'll stop. But if Israel goes in hard and they have lots of casualties, or they have big casualty producing strikes like on military installations or especially on any of their nuclear facilities, then I think you can expect an even bigger Iranian response, and then it's going to escalate, and then everybody has to be worried about a regional war breaking out.
Well, talking about diplomatically trying to rein in Israel's actions on ground, that is something the United States has been trying to do. We've seen a lot of warning statements that have come out from the United States as well. That being said, it did say in the aftermath of these attacks that its support for Israel remains ironclad. What I believe I'm trying to understand is, to what extent do you think the United States could or should get involved in this?
Well, by no means should the United States get involved with this. If Israel and Iran get into a war and the spark was Israel's attack of the embassy, that's an issue between Israel and Iran, and absolutely the U.S. should stay out. We're already very vulnerable in the area because of our troops in in Syria and in Iraq. And we've already come under fire from numerous of these Iran-backed groups, and three Americans have already been killed. We should get those troops, all of them, out of there, out of harm's way, so that they're no longer in the crossfire and they're not at risk. But in no means should the U.S. join with Israel in attacking Iran, because Iran didn't attack the United States. We're not at war with Iran, and we don't need to be at war with Iran.
All right, sir. Now, that being said, do you think this will have any sort of a bearing on Israel's operations in Gaza?
It could, because look, Israel, everybody talks about how successful their Iron Dome was and all that tonight, and certainly it was. It performed spectacularly, knocking down, I think, 90-something%, maybe 99% of all those. But it comes at a cost, because they have used an enormous number of interceptor missiles. And those things are not just expensive, they're also hard to replicate, because the construction capacity is very slow. And a lot of those missiles have already gone to Ukraine from the United States. And we provided Israel with a lot of the interceptor missiles. So there are a limited quantity. And if Israel gets into an extended, sustained war with Iran, Iran has more drones and other missiles than Israel does interceptor missiles. And they've got to keep that in mind and be careful that they don't get overextended and then suddenly find themselves vulnerable to air attack.
All right. I believe there's a lot of discussion on what Israel's next steps would be as well. That being said, there were always fears of a new front of this war opening up. From what it does appear that this response was limited to just these airborne attacks. Do you think that's the case?
Well, it has been so far. And I mean, even aside from the statement that came out of Tehran, it's self-evident that they want to avoid a war. Iran's got a lot of internal trouble that they have. Their economy is very weak and fragile, and they definitely don't want a war. But that being said, they will defend themselves, and they're not going to allow themselves to be attacked like this embassy or whatever. If Netanyahu overdoes it in his response, I mean, they will retaliate, but they don't want to. So we have a good opportunity to de-escalate this, and if diplomatic pressure can be put on Netanyahu to rein him in, and so he doesn't respond very strong, then this can go down. But if he doesn't, if diplomatic force can't hold Netanyahu back, then the risk of a wider war is very real.
All right. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, thank you so much for joining us on WION World as One with your insights on this. We'll, of course, continue to monitor the situation closely. For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.